Hi, I'm Ellie Bladen, and I'm a member of the crew bringing you content from the Festival of Nature. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Katy Connors. Katy is an artist and researcher and is currently the Spring Artist in Residence at Watershed Pervasive Media Studio. So we're going to get up to some hydroponics hijinks. Thank you so much for joining us, Katy.
Hi everybody.
So Katy, your current residency focuses on hydroponics. So first of all, what exactly is the practice of hydroponics?
Sure, okay. Well, I'm an artist. I'm specifically interested in the way that arts and technology kind of meld together and how that relates to nature and the wider world. So hydroponics is a water-based system. So it's used instead of soil-based systems, it's a water-based, and it's used for growing fresh leafy plants such as salad leaves or spinach or flowers, but also peppers and tomatoes and things like that. So there's no soil, and the plants take up all the nutrients that they need and the chemicals they need to grow, such as nitrogen or potassium or phosphate, and they directly come up through the roots. So the roots are submerged in this watery media, and they absorb it, and it enables the plants to grow. And also within these systems, there's also additional sort of LED lights and a kind of monitoring of the temperature and the pH acidity, which makes the plants very happy in their environment.
So this all sounds fascinating, because I'm sure that a lot of people would think that soil is totally integral to growing plants, but I can see a lot going on in your studio behind it, no soil involved, and it all looks very exciting. Would you be happy to give us a quick tour of what you've got going on there before we ask anything else?
Absolutely. I mean, I was specifically interested in how to grow primarily food crops, but mostly in an urban environment. So an environment that maybe people where they don't have access to soil, they don't have access to outdoor spaces. And I think with lockdown, we've seen a lot of people kind of very much interested in growing their own food, or maybe getting access to allotments, or kind of using their garden. So I was really interested in, how do you do that if you don't have access to these kind of spaces? So I thought I would use my studio, which is, a very kind of barren space, and see if what I could grow. So I'll give you a tour.
Excited.
So this is my studio here. And this is the first system that I set up. So this is a domestic hydroponic system. It has a chamber. I don't know if you can see the chamber here, which is full of water. There's 5 liters of water. And these plants here, they're enormous. They've been grown from seed in the last 6 weeks. And these are tomato plants. There's also a cucumber vine here. I don't know if you can see that. There's peppers, and there's also a very healthy basil plant. If I can show you those leaves. So yeah, this is a kind of off-the-shelf kit that I started with. You can buy them online, and they're very simple. They're designed to be very simple for people to set up at home. I've got one at home too, where I've grown spinach, and so that was in 4 weeks. I managed to grow spinach to eat from seed.
Wow.
So some other experimental systems that I've set up are here. Ooh, excuse me. And I don't know if you can see those. So these I've specifically wanted to see if I could set up a kind of water-based system, but using recycled plastic. So these are recycled water bottles. And there's also, now then I don't know if you can see it very well, there's also a yogurt pot. So these are lettuces, believe it or not. And also this is a pepper, which again was grown from seed. And they're under LED lights, which give the particular frequency of light. So they're daylight, but there's also red and blue lights there to like warm the plant and also to enable photosynthesis. And there's a fan here which provides don't know if you can see that,
Yeah.
artificial wind, because it strengthens the stems. And then this is another large system. This is a larger kit. This is 20 litres of water. And again, the plants here are in a rock wool media, and then the roots are bathed in the water underneath. So these are exactly the same age. The daylight comes from a bulb, 2 LED bulbs, and they're set on a timer that corresponds with the sunrise and the sunset. So it's important to give plants rest time where they can sleep and just have a rest from the daylight. And then finally, I'm just setting up this system at the moment. I don't know if you can see. So this is a large LED light, and this is a meter square chamber of water. I'm currently filling it up. There's 80 litres of water there. I'm trying to get to 120 litres, and I'll transplant the larger plants into this afternoon. So yeah, that's quite exciting. That's the biggest system, and that's more kind of akin to the systems that you'll see used primarily in agriculture. So I'm really interested in sort of seeing how the systems, the sort of much smaller systems that I can set up in the studio, how they correspond with kind of agriculture and how we kind of grow our fresh food and vegetables.
That's fascinating. So do plants grown in hydroponic systems actually grow faster than in soil? Because I'm seeing some of those plants and they're huge for only a few weeks old.
Yeah, they do seem to. I am quite astonished actually about how quickly they seem to grow. I think it's because the roots normally will grow it down into the soil, and they'll seek out the nutrients within the soil. And that's why it's very important to water the soil when you're growing plants. But here they don't have to seek out. The roots are directly immersed in the water itself, so they can directly absorb all the nutrients they need.
That's amazing. And what actually made you start working on hydroponics? It seems quite unusual.
Well, there's a number of reasons, really. I was lucky enough to have a residency at the Bristol University a couple of years ago, where I was in a biomedical laboratory, and I was really fascinated by the kind of how nature is. I mean, this was to do with biomedical nature, but it was a very sort of highly technologized sort of system that they were growing cells, and they were sort of working with plants in other aspects of the university. But I was very interested in how they kind of grew plants and how they grew cells in these kind of laboratory environments. And so that was a couple of years ago. And then last year, I spent a lot of time on a friend's allotment through lockdown. And I became very interested in kind of where we get our food from and how the difference with how we grow food and how you appreciate kind of the plants and you kind of get into a rhythm with working with plants. And also the curiosity of seeing where our food comes from. And I kind of put 2 and 2 together and thought, well, yeah, like I said, how can we grow plants in lots of different environments? And yeah, then I kind of thought about hydroponics and what an interesting kind of system it is. And I think also thinking about the kind of changing environment, with the climate crisis, it seemed to me a kind of maybe an urgent question, more than a kind of curiosity, but more of a kind of sense of urgency of how we can think about where food crops come from and how to kind of manage our changing environment. So
at the moment, is this being done on a large scale to actually feed lots of people?
What, hydroponics?
Yeah,
it is actually. It's used a lot more, I think, than I think we realise in terms of food crops. I know in the Netherlands that a great deal, like the majority of the food crops are grown hydroponically, not so much in artificially lit environments, although that does happen, but also in this country there's a lot of greenhouses that grow tomatoes are actually grown hydroponically rather than in soil. So what I found out, especially in a kind of time of kind of uncertain water supply, maybe in terms of drought, that that hydroponics actually recycles the water. So there might be like an initial chamber of water where you've got 5, 20 or 120 litres, but that water is recycled until the plants have kind of absorbed the water, and then you top it up. So I know that there's far less used than conventional kind of soil-based agriculture. I think that's why it's quite popular.
Right, that's so interesting, because I know you were talking about the link between, climate change and hydroponics, and I was thinking, is this something which actually could be quite sort of differ locally as to how useful it is? Because in some locations, in a changing climate, we're going to see more drought, and in some places we're going to see much wetter conditions. But is this something that you think could actually be globally quite useful?
I think so, yeah, because I think there's different access to daylight, for example. Like in this country, we have very kind of poor daylight, or we're very we're quite dependent on the hours of daylight. But we can use LED lighting. We can use solar panels to store energy for the LED lighting. I know it sounds like a funny kind of roundabout way to go, but I think that the weather changes so kind of dramatically from year to year that it might be a better way to kind of think about how to grow. Or certainly, like, I think domestically it might be a kind of more interesting way to think about how you can grow inside, and you can grow all year round, so you don't have to kind of work so seasonally. You can grow fresh vegetables or salad vegetables all year round, and they're incredibly tasty compared to maybe the vegetables that you would buy at the supermarket, that you don't know how old they are. They're wrapped in plastic and you don't know where they've come from. Whereas if we've got a kitchen counter sort of domestic system, it's very easy just to pick them and eat them straight away. They're incredibly fresh and tasty. So.
And how accessible is the equipment? Because you've got some things in there like LED lights, you've got a fan. Do you think this is something which most people will be able to access for their own use?
I think so. I think it depends on. I think what I found is it actually develops with confidence. So I was very apprehensive when I started working with this, and I'm an artist. I'm prepared to kind of give things a go. It's part of what I do. I like to experiment, but I was also very apprehensive in terms of, am I doing it right? What if I kill all the plants? And but I think if you start small scale, that there are more things on the market now if you want to kind of buy an enclosed system. But there are also places where you can buy the kind of individual items and kind of start to put it together yourself. What I'm also interested in doing is running workshops, like community sort of workshops, and I hope to start doing that this summer, where I'm specifically kind of taking people on a journey about how we can kind of grow hydroponics together in the small scale containers that I showed you, the recycled cartons. I mean, they're accessible to anybody really. So all you need is a carton. You need the water and the chemical fertilizers, and then there we go. You could possibly do it on a sunny windowsill. So yeah.
And what was the thought behind using recycled cartons? Is that part of a sort of bigger idea you have about generally reusing waste?
It is actually. What I have noticed is with hydroponics, there's a great dependence on plastics, and in some ways, I think it's very easy to kind of build systems, but there's a level of kind of reusing and recycling that I think that we can do more of. And I was just very aware of, rather than going and buying another plastic pot, how about we reuse some of the plastic pots that we throw out every week? I mean, with some of the plastic pots that I've got, I just did a literal walk round on recycling day around the block and found some plastic cartons that I was then able to use. It's quite simple. I think it's all about this kind of attention to the climate and to our changing world, and just being a bit more aware and a bit more responsible, perhaps. So.
Yeah, and presumably it works just the same as the type that you buy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in because if you're using cartons that have food in already, so they're already the kind of plastic where it's safe to use for food. So you're fine to use them for growing food crops. Yeah.
And in your studio, you've got, like I said, you've got your fans that to strengthen the stems of the plants. So is the idea that these could be used in completely closed systems and maybe even in space? Is that something that we could sort of look at?
Absolutely. NASA has already been trialing this. So hydroponics has been going for a long time. Apparently, like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the mythical were hydroponic gardens. So if we think about that, there's a long history. It became more prevalent post-Second World War. It was used by, I think, American troops who had to use Pacific Islands where there was no soil to grow crops, and they set up hydroponic stations. And it's now used in Antarctica on the bases there, and it has been trialed in space by NASA, who are looking at hydroponics in relation to gravity and anti-gravity. So yeah, it's quite an old system actually, and that's something else that I really wanted to kind of introduce, because I think people maybe get a bit scared by it. They maybe think that it's a bit kind of sci-fi, but actually it's a very long system, a very kind of established practice. So
it does sound quite sci-fi, and especially when you talk about space, because we know there are some people who are thinking, okay, if the Earth is being sort of torn apart by a climate crisis, then maybe we'll move to Mars. And obviously there are different opinions on that. You know, my opinion personally being, let's save what we have here rather than, you know, running away to Mars. But yeah, you kind of have got hydroponics can be looked at in different ways. It can either be this incredibly technological system which can help us do things like go to other planets, or it can be something to make the most out of what we've got here. I mean, you said that it's got a really long history. Do we know how far back it goes?
I think that there's these kind of stories of, like I say, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. There's also, I was speaking to somebody the other day who mentioned that in Myanmar they have sort of rafts on lakes, and I think that's the same system. So the plant roots will go down into the water and then enable the tomato plants to grow on the rafts. So I think there's kind of many different kind of versions. They're not all this kind of technologized versions that we perhaps see here today. But one thing that I am trying to do in the studio, because this is it's an arts project, I'm trying to be a bit more experimental. So for example, kind of setting the timers. I think I mentioned that I'm setting the timer to the exact sort of sunrise and sunset. What I'm also going to do with this larger system is to set it's called an ebb and flow system, and I'm really interested in the links with the tide and sort of you know, because the moon affects the tide, obviously, and I'm just thinking about how we can kind of bring in older sort of planetary cycles, such as the tidal system, and how maybe I can set the timer and kind of see how the plants respond to that. So I'm really thinking in kind of a bit more expansive way. The other thing with the large system is that I'm going to use a number of kind of clay pebbles. That's what you use to kind of keep the plants sort of upright and supported. But I'm also interested in bringing in different kinds of materials, such as fossils, because they're already got a much older kind of relationship to sort of the planet. So I'm just kind of playing around with a lot of these ideas about how we introduce sort of older materials into these sort of more technologized systems, perhaps.
So it sounds like you're coming at it from like a really interdisciplinary point of view, because it's, you know, you're an artist, but there's a lot of research that's going into this and there's a lot of science behind it. So do you collaborate with people from different fields to, I guess, to do what you do?
I have in the past, yeah. I have worked, I have collaborated both with scientists. I did a project, I said, with a biomedical scientist, also with human geographers and social scientists. And also previously I've worked with engineers to experiment with processes of 3D printing. So yeah, I'm very interested. And with this particular project, I'm going to potentially work with some robotics PhD students. So yeah, there's a lot of potential here. I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested in this field, then please get in touch, because I do like collaborating with other people from different disciplines.
I'd love to know, can you tell us anything about the robotics?
Well, we're looking at how to kind of potentially build systems that would facilitate. So I think it's called heliotropism, where plants like follow sunlight and their stems move. So we're wondering about building a kind of system where the light moves and kind of artificially creates this sort of heliotropism. Or yeah, that's one of the ideas that we've discussed.
And are you finding that there's generally more of an interest from artists to work with scientists and vice versa?
I think so, yeah. I think now, because we're in an age where you can't possibly know everything about a subject. So I think that the possibilities are very open, therefore, about collaborating with people and bringing those different sort of knowledges together.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned some of the things that you're hoping to do, like you said, with your new setup. Is this hydroponics in general something that you're kind of hoping to continue into the future? Do you have any kind of big blue sky ideas?
Yeah, I do have a few ideas. Yeah, I have a few ideas up my sleeve. I think I'm really interested in food security at the moment, and really thinking about how we can kind of build upon these systems, and also about the educational aspects of it. I think it's really important for people to kind of see this as something that they could really enjoy, and they could really learn about, where our food comes from, and how easy it is actually to grow, how easy it is to plant seeds and for them to flourish. And I think there's something really great about, I think we've all kind of maybe realized with lockdown how important kind of inviting the outside into indoor spaces can be. And a lot of people have, have a resurgent interest in house plants, or also spending time with their pets. I think there's a great interest in that, and kind of spending times with things that aren't necessarily sort of so human, really. I think there's something to be gained from that. So,
and I imagine it's something that you could get children quite interested in as well, right? Things that, like growing things, it's just it's easy to see the result. And I think particularly with hydroponics, because you see the results so quickly, it's probably particularly great for doing with little people.
It is, actually. I've done a lot with my 7-year-old son at home. We've done a lot of kind of exploring with hydroponics, and he loves it. And he's actually started eating spinach, which is something that I would never expect. So yeah, he was really intrigued to find it, to try it, and to see what it tasted like. And something else which I didn't show you actually, but something that's really fascinating is, with hydroponics, you can see the root growth. You can see how much root growth comes off even a tiny plant. And that's really fascinating, actually, because that's something that's ordinarily so invisible, hidden in the soil. But if you lift the little cups up, or you kind of peek under the edge of the system, the roots are incredible. They're very long, and they're very kind of very sort of tendrils, and for such kind of small plants, there's still kind of quite an expansive root system. So to get an insight into nature in that way is really quite interesting.
I feel like this would be a brilliant thing for teachers to use in biology lessons, because I remember in, pre-GCSE, we learned about living things and plants as part of that. But yeah, you're right. It's usually so hidden, and we see it in drawings, and, maybe if you do a bit of digging in the garden. But, if you're in an urban environment and you don't have a garden, this is a great way to sort of feel a bit more connected with it, I suppose.
I think so, definitely. And the rate that things grow as well, to go from a tiny seed, which in itself is incredibly, fascinating, all the different kind of sizes and shapes of seeds, but to go from that within 4 weeks to something that you can eat, and that is a kind of vital living thing. It's quite fascinating.
So are there limits to what you can grow? Because I know you're growing crop plants, and you're particularly interested in crop plants, but, could you grow flowers? I mean, could you grow things like root vegetables?
I'm not entirely sure with root vegetables, actually. I have seen that there's a lot of online communities, as you might imagine, dedicated to hydroponics. I have seen some examples of radishes, for example, but I haven't seen anything like potatoes, or I don't imagine that carrots would work, because, you need that kind of, the kind of soil for but I mean, I don't know. Yeah. It's possible to experiment. I did try chamomile, so I've tried sage and thyme at home, and they've grown, but the chamomile hasn't grown at all. So that's something interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. I suppose, sorry.
One thing that I would say is that you do need to find a way to pollinate your plants indoors. So, but you can get a paintbrush and kind of spread the pollen like a bee would from one flower to another, and that will pollinate the plants.
Right, so this really can be done in a closed system. And our producer Sam has just reminded me that actually potatoes would need darkness. Of course, a lot of what you're working with are things where you're controlling the light, but you're giving it a period of daylight.
Yes, you are, but of course you can always switch the lights off. So, and I think a lot of people do grow hydroponic plants in spaces that are kind of sealed spaces where you can introduce artificial lights into that, but you can also switch them off. So,
okay, this is fascinating, and I love how you're kind of still researching this, still working through it. It feels like an exploration, which is, I think, it's just so wonderful about it. It feels like, like a real kind of collaboration between art and science, and I'm just excited to see what you come up with next.
And it's also collaboration with the plants as well, because I'm having to do everything in relation to the time scale that they're growing at, which at the moment is quite quick.
So do you find it's quite a sort of meditative experience almost, because you almost can't control it? You're kind of in their hands.
Absolutely, and that's also in common with a lot of artists' work. You kind of relinquish control at some level, and you allow the kind of material or the kind of the inspiration to guide you. So yeah, there is a lot of kind of similarities with other art sort of media that artists use. But yeah, it's very exciting actually working with living materials to make work.
I think that's so brilliant. I've got to say, this is something that I'd seen little bits on Instagram. I never really thought about doing it myself, but you have fully inspired me to buy one of these kits. I feel like as a beginner, I might buy one of the kits rather than trying to do anything too creative like you. But it sounds brilliant. I love it. And I love what you're saying about you can just pick it. It's fresh. You don't need very much room. It just sounds like a win-win situation.
Oh, good. I'm glad I've inspired you. That's great.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you so much, Katy, for showing us around your studio and chatting through your work. If people did want to find out more about your exhibition, about your work in general, where should they go? I
have a website. It's katyconnor.net. You can also look at the Pervasive Media Studios, because they've supported this this research project. So yeah, take a look at the website, and also my studio's at Spike Island in Bristol. So you can check out the Spike Island website and find more about myself and other artists here there.
That's so brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Katy, for joining us.
Thanks, Ellie. It's been great to have you here.
Also, of course, thank you to everyone watching. Well, remember that we also have lots more events going on this week as part of the Festival of Nature. So do head over to festivalofnature.org.uk and you can find out what else we've got going on and how you can get involved. And of course, if you're enjoying the festival and if you're thinking of doing your own hydroponic setup, do let us know on social media. We're at Fest of Nature on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can use the hashtag, which I think is going along the bottom of the screen, which is hashtag Fest of Nature 21. Thank you for joining in.